This is Jacob. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Crowdfunding Nerds podcast. Today we're talking about Kickstarters, and more importantly, why do we sometimes stay away? For those of us that are board game enthusiasts and have big collections, we often find ourselves shying away from backing a lot of projects. So we're bringing on a special guest today and talking about why there's some of that hesitancy, so that maybe as you pitch your projects, you can avoid having so many people sit on the fence.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Or the Alliance.
Amazing.
Well, welcome, folks, to another episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. And we're not joined by Andrew today. He's busy with lots of stuff deliverance related. But I am joined by Jacob and Brent of Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples. How are you doing, Brent?
I am doing good. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
So Brent and I connected through a mutual friend. And this mutual friend was just letting me know that he has a friend called Brent, and he's got this YouTube channel. He does reviews, and I said, well, I've got a podcast, and we talk about tabletop games. But he let me know that Brent doesn't really follow the Kickstarter scene, so we wanted to dive into that, into someone like yourself, Brent, who's an avid board gamer. You've got a YouTube channel. You're creating lots of content. You're obviously passionate about the hobby space, but maybe you're less enthusiastic about the Kickstarter space. And we sort of just want to explore that in this episode. So, Brent, why don't you introduce yourself? Let us know who you are and where you're based and all that good stuff.
Okay, yeah. So my name is Brent, obviously, and I am from Central Canada. And I run a YouTube channel, Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples. And I started this about, I think, January 2021. My wife was saying, like, hey, you should start reviewing board games. And I was like, no, there's like a dime a dozen reviewers out there. And I wasn't really interested in doing any of that. I have some, I guess, history in radio. And so I guess I'm a little tech savvy in that regard. So, and maybe a little creative, maybe not. And so I got into this in January, I believe, 2021. And it's just been a lot of fun. I've had a chance to meet designers, not in person, but virtually. At the same time, I did get to meet Chris Quilliams, illustrator of like Pandemic and Carcassonne, and he worked at the time for Plan B Games, so I had a chance to meet him and play Azul with him and whatnot. And so, just had a chance to connect with designers and talk about how they get their ideas from ideas into the board games that we love to play and that hit Kickstarters and whatnot. And so, that's kind of me. My wife and I, we have 2 kids. We play games quite a bit. And so, yeah.
Great. And you also have a podcast where you interview designers.
Yeah. It's called Ideas. That's what it's called. And like I said, I've interviewed publishers, designers. So some of the folks I've interviewed, James Wilson, designer of Everdell, Phil Walker Harding, Jamie Stegmeyer, Chris Quilliams on the illustrating side, Andrew Bosley, as well as Reiner Knizia. So I've had a chance to connect with some prolific game designers, I would say, along the way, and just find out how their ideas come to life, because I think a lot of us just have those ideas and sometimes we just don't know how to get them out or, put pen to paper, whether you're got an idea as an author or whatever, how to do that. But tabletop gaming is a little bit different because you have to like physically make a prototype and then start playing it, and how those evolve and how those get created.
Cool. So how long have you been in the sort of tabletop hobby space, playing games? Is something you always grew up with, or something that you came in later in life?
Thinking back, I did grow up playing games. I remember my dad had a copy like Millborns way back in the day. That game was probably really, really terrible nowadays. But I had that, and then played a lot of Risk in high school. I did play some Monopoly, so some of those like just general mass market games. And then I would say probably I got married in 2011. A little bit before that, like played Bonanza, played like Ticket to Ride for the first time. And then kind of 2014 is when I really started to, I guess 10 years ago, I really started to, I guess, digest content, like board gaming content. Like started watching the Dice Tower, started watching like Dan King, Game Boy Geek. I really liked his stuff, and not to say I don't anymore. Like that, he's kind of the one that I watched a lot of right at the beginning, and then of course the Dice Tower, and then yeah, just been buying games ever since.
Yeah. Now, I know one of the daunting tasks of creating any type of YouTube channel, I know that you've been in the space, as you said, for over 10 years now, but you're only recently coming into like the content creator space.
Yeah.
And there are so many people doing this and all have their different takes and avenues. What was your sort of strategy in order to stand out on the platform and to kind of bring in your own uniqueness into that?
Wow, that's a deep question, because maybe I haven't thought about that enough. I think I've just been just to have fun. Like, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that any of my stuff is like groundbreaking or anything like that. I'm kind of making my reviews on how I've seen others make them. So I'm not like a carbon copy in that regard. But I like, when I even watch reviews, I like knowing how the game's made. Or sorry, I like knowing like how to play the game and then thoughts about that. And so I don't know, I've just been, the uniqueness that I've had, man, I'm putting on the spot. I'm just looking at more games in front of me here.
Well, I think that's important because what it sounds like to me, and Jake, I don't know what your thoughts are, is you didn't go into this necessarily to make this a business. You're just doing this because you like the tabletop space, and you just wanted to carve out your space there. You weren't necessarily doing it with like a business marketing strategy. How am I going to get my own way in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I haven't, like, since the beginning, this hasn't been like, hey, this is going to be my side hustle that I'm going to make into a career or a business. It's kind of just me talking about the games that I love to play. And I've really, really enjoyed the whole meeting people, obviously like yourself in this regard. And this would never be happening if I wouldn't be reviewing things. Right. And so sure. I didn't go into it as business minded. It was more of just like, hey, this is like a sub hobby and something that I really like to do. Because I think it's very dangerous for those getting into the content creation if they're going into it for that like business side of things, to like not overwork yourself, right? Because I'm part of whatever different groups on media creation and stuff like that. And like the number one thing people say is like, have fun. If you're not having fun, stop doing it. Right? Because if you're just chasing numbers and chasing algorithms and things like that, and it's not working out for you, or you're not catching on, you're not getting traction, things like that, like you're mentally just going to burn out so fast. And so for me, it's just been like, you know what? I'm going to post content once a week. And I have every week since January 2021. And so I'm just like, maybe I'm like the turtle and the tortoise and the hare, just like slow and steady. Just have fun with it. As long as I'm having fun with it, I'm just going to keep going with this stuff.
Very cool.
Great. Jacob, it looks like you want to say something.
No, I was just saying, I think that is really important because when you're coming from a place of enjoyment and it's not that you're necessarily pushing a business, I think you end up being a lot more authentic in your commentary on your reviews because you're speaking from a place of personal enjoyment and not necessarily from the standpoint of trying to either monetize the reviews or to make a business out of it or present it a certain way. So I think that's kind of important as you get started, is to keep that authenticity going.
Yeah, so I also think it's kind of like maybe the natural progression of people in the hobby space. You know, they start off playing kind of like your entry level hobby games, and they get the game get more and more complex as they get kind of further into the weeds, and then eventually you become a content creator. You maybe start writing blogs about the board games, or you start creating YouTube content. So I think it's definitely kind of part of people's enjoyment of this space, right? It's also just sharing things that they've learned, whether it's creating stuff or just being really involved in forums like Board Game Geek. I think it's all part of the enjoyment of the space. So with all that being said, in terms of your journey into the tabletop hobby and the kind of growth of your interest in this and to eventually becoming a content creator. What has your relationship been with Kickstarter?
I know you asked the question. My relationship with Kickstarter, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Kickstarter for me, I'll say this: I don't openly back all that much. Not that I'm against Kickstarter by any stretch of the imagination. I will say I have backed stuff from on the Raccoon Tycoon game and Everdell, like their complete collection. I backed that. I will say at the same time, I did just back the second edition of Trekking the World by Underdog Games. So I'm not like anti Kickstarter. I actually follow Kickstarters quite a bit, but I have a hard time pulling the trigger on backing because, well, for a few reasons. Do you want me to jump into like my reasons or?
Yeah, sure. I think that's probably, it's going to be useful for our listeners as publishers because you probably represent a large group of people where they're in the space, they really like board games, but they're just not backing a lot of Kickstarters for whatever reason. So I think it's helpful for people to know those reasons so that they can either address them or, work around those issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I kind of have, I think 3. I should have written them down, but I didn't. Okay, number 1, it's like the most obvious one. The finances. The finances is the biggest thing for me. Okay. I am a father of 2. My kids are 11 and 8. So they're busy. They're getting into extracurricular things like that. Life is expensive. So the number 1 thing is money. Okay. Let's at the same time, let's put that aside. Let's say I had infinite money. Which I don't. I'm not Elon Musk, but mind you, he doesn't have infinite money either. But you know what I mean. Say I did. Sometimes I feel that the Kickstarters, like they say, the price is X amount and whatever, but sometimes I can buy it cheaper on retail when they're actually fully funded. And yes, sometimes there are like exclusives to Kickstarter that I won't get. And sometimes it drives me crazy, but like, oh man, I really, really want to back this because I will get this. I don't want to like point out any like specific companies doing like good, bad job, just whatever. Simon just did like the big DC universe, like DC United.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of Marvel United. I love that game. And I wanted to back that so much, but I couldn't because it would have cost me like upfront like $100. And $100 might be nothing for some people. Maybe they have, their monthly budget of $100 they can spend every month on whatever their hobby is. I'm not at that point in my life, having like a younger family. And so I don't, but I wrestled with that because I was like, oh man, the base game is going to come out and it's probably going to be $50 and I'm going to get like just the core box. But if I back the game founder, the crowdfunding right now, I'll have to like double that, but I'm going to get like so many stretch goals. And that kind of like drove me nuts that I didn't pull the trigger on that because I knew I was not going to get all this extra content for only probably twice the amount that I was going to pay originally, or that I'll end up paying. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So so that's the finances is probably the biggest reason. Being from Canada, shipping is really expensive as well. So I also have to calculate that into if I'm going to back a Kickstarter, because again, so Canadian dollar versus American dollar, majority of crowdfunding is all in American dollar. So time recording, I don't know what it is. It's like $1 American is like, no, like $1 Canadian is like 71 cents American. So I'm losing 30% on everything across the board. And that's why sometimes the retail is kind of cheaper for me because with the exchange rate. So again, that comes down to the finances. But that would kind of be my biggest thing. the shipping, because sometimes I'll be like back a game and it'll be like whatever, 59 American, and then shipping to Canada is like 21 American. So I'm at like 59, 69, 79. I'm at 80 Americans. I'm already $110 in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I get it. I get it. Like publishers, they can't get around the shipping. Like shipping, that's just living in 2024. It's not cheap to ship. Right. And so they can't get around that. And I know some companies will give like discounted shipping and things like that. And sometimes you hear that and you see the shipping table and you're like, wow, that's crazy. There's already a shipping discount. And again, I'm not like, these aren't shots at publishers. These aren't shots at game design developers and stuff like that, right? I just be namely publishers. It's just the reality of where I am at and why I don't back Kickstarters, because it's an investment that I'm also only going to get a return in 18 months down the road. Right. So I'm kind of tying up that money as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I love deluxe editions of things, and so it's a delicate balance for sure for me personally.
And have you found things like GameFound stretch pay to be an attractive, maybe workaround to some of that, where you don't have to kind of throw up this big expense in 1 month. You kind of stretch it out over 4 or 6 months, because it's going to take so many months for it to come to you anyway. That might be something easier. Has that been an attractive thing for you? Has that made you have you ever been on GameFound and be like, oh, I could actually get this for stretch pay and it's not going to be as taxing in that regard?
Right. Yeah. And I thought about that even for the latest like DC Heroes and United or whatever it was. I thought about that, and even before that, I thought about the Castles of Burgundy one from Awakened Realms, like, because the first time I ever played with Castles of Burgundy was actually that version of the game. So then in my head, I'm like, I can't. Whatever, like maybe I'm pretentious in that, but I'm like, I can't play the normal version. Like I've played this, I had the acrylic tiles, I had everything. Well, I didn't have the 3D trains, but you know what I mean? And so the game was like blinged out to the nines. I'm like, well, if I'm going to get this game, I have to get all that stuff. And then I priced it all out and I'm like, it's going to be like $350 or $300 or whatever it was. And I'm like, do my kids get Christmas gifts this year, or do I get a Christmas gift this year? Like that's what I thought. And even with that stretch pay, so I was like, okay, break it up, $300, $50 a month. I don't necessarily have even $50 a month just to be like, you know what I mean? Like birthday and Christmas comes once a year, and maybe extra gift here or something at work, a little bonus, and can free up some finances that I can do, but I don't have like a monthly, okay, I can spend $60 a month on whatever my hobby is, which is board gaming. I don't necessarily have that liberty or that freedom to do so. But yeah, the stretch pay definitely is something that I've thought about. They often, if they do that, so I think the stretch pay for the DC one, you had to back the $100 level, like not like the $59 level. I think that's what it was as well. So it's like, okay, if it was a $60 one, yeah, maybe I would have done that. $15. That's almost like impulse buy monthly, right? Like, oh, I can spend extra $15. But if it was, I had to do it at that $100 one, so then I just couldn't justify it.
Sure.
Jacob, what's your sort of Kickstarter strategy cadence like? What's your sort of philosophy when it comes to making purchases?
I think it's actually kind of aligns a bit. Some of it does come down to some of the pay versus like the amount of exclusives and kind of FOMO that gets thrown in with certain things. Like I do think the DC United one is kind of a good one to bring up, because it is one that I followed as well. I'm a big fan of Marvel United. I backed all in on the very first season of Marvel United. I backed season 2, but didn't go all in, and then didn't back season 3. And I ultimately didn't end up backing the DC Heroes one. And I think it's kind of one of the things that you pointed out when you look at some of the evaluations. They're pretty transparent with their core game. you can find that at retail. I mean, Simon's a big enough, or Kaman is a big enough company that, once it comes out at retail, you can expect it to be lower. So when you have that like base entry pledge at like $59, it's not super attractive because I know they're going to produce the game. In fact, they'd already said we've already got retail copies coming. And so you're not really incentivized to back it so much at that low level because it is going to be available later for a fairly significant discount if you're willing to bide your time. I think my biggest hang up with their model is that the heart of the game really is in a lot of the expansions, and everything is set up as these Kickstarter exclusive expansions. And so the kicker is like, hey, we want you to come in, but you've got to back for this amount before you can buy this expansion. And then if you don't get it now, it's never going to be available. And the expansions start to get more and more grand so that the expansions cost as much as the base game does. And so I think it really quickly came down, like with that game, it was like, well, if I want this one, like I really would like to get these 2 expansions, but they're never going to be available at retail. But I'm going to have to spend like $350 to go all in to pick this stuff up. And for me, it was kind of one of those things that even with the stretch pay, it was hard to justify because it's like, that's essentially would be like, this is the only thing I can consider backing this year. So I have to I end up doing kind of a cost evaluation of what other Kickstarters have been announced by other companies. And do I want to spend it all now, like my entire crowdfunding budget now on this one project? Or just say, you know what, I'm sorry. As much as I want to play your game, I just can't justify shelling out that much, to dive in to get really like sometimes even just like one expansion that I want. And so I'm basically paying like triple for one expansion I want and a bunch of other fluff content that sometimes I'll probably never even use. So I think some of that does kind of come into play. I think for me personally, one of the things I have is, unfortunately, maybe it's just the American in me. I have a lack of patience sometimes where it's like, I want to play a game now. If I think about like I'm running game groups or I'm playing with my kids, I think that's a hard one is because my kids are young. My kids are 4, 6, and 9. And sometimes I see a game that'd be like, oh man, this will be great to play with my 6-year-old. But then I'm looking at, it's going to be 18 months before I get it. Like they're going to be in a completely different stage of life by the time this game is here. Will they even want to play this by the time it comes out? And so sometimes for me, I will sacrifice backing something for the sake of immediacy. Like what can I track down now that I could play to enjoy with my current group of gamers as opposed to waiting. So I think for me, like one of the more attractive things that's come down with certain Kickstarters, I know that for a lot of, our client, Sean, we have a lot of first time developers or people that are, it is kind of a side thing. And so the game is not made yet. They can't afford to go ahead and print the game. And then they're just running a Kickstarter to kind of pick up the slack. And so for a lot of them, they don't have a choice. That's going to be a year, 18 months before they can get their product out. But there have been other more established companies that have started delivering games. I could say like All Play, for example, just did River Valley Glassworks. They announced that they were going to Kickstarter at Gamma in March. I think the Kickstarter went live in April. And they started fulfilling last month. So like 3 months after the Kickstarter concluded, they were fulfilling, and they were upfront about it. When I talked with them at Gamma, they're like, we've already ordered the game. It's already on the boats and coming over. The Kickstarter is more just to cover some of the overhead and pre-orders and stuff like that. And so for me, that almost became a slightly more attractive proposition because I was like, this game looks really neat. I can back it now. It wasn't a super overblown production. There was an option if you wanted to go really blinged out. But the base game was a great production, good value. It was only like $5 shipping. So shipping was really attractive. And it was like, hey, you can play, you will deliver it in 3 months. And at that point, that seems like, that's a great pre-order option. And so for me, I think that's one of the things that's become a little bit more attractive is kind of satisfying some of that immediacy.
I think All Play, is in a little hot water with that one because
Sure.
it's at Target. It's at Target in the States now. And yeah, they were fulfilling, but I think it was like saying like Canadian backers and even American backers expect it like end of August or end of August, beginning of September.
Sure.
But it was available at Target, just the base game, or like not the Founders Edition, which again I looked into because I was like, oh man, neoprene mat. It has like acrylic tiles, like glass, like pieces. Like it looked sweet. It would have been again close to 100, but the Target is just the retail version of it, and so some people got really burned by that and really upset because, or currently are, because the game that even if they did it on the retail version, they could go to Target and buy it.
Sure.
Or wait another almost month. And so that's a tough balance for a company as well.
Sure.
And they've been transparent in saying like, we had these options, crossroads or whatever. And I don't have all the information, so don't like gospel truth here. But I have been following that Kickstarter, and there are some people upset because the retail's out before they got it, and which kind of goes against what the whole Kickstarter started as, right? Like Kickstarter started as you're backing a small company that this will never come into reality without the help of backers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really morphed into something more of a pre-sale over the years. And again, I want to be transparent. I'm not anti-Kickstarter because I'm going to be working on content. It may be up when this goes up, I'm not sure, for a company that we will have content on their Kickstarter page. So I need to be outright in that. So I'm not like, hey, don't back Kickstarters, they're terrible. And then here I am saying you should back this on Kickstarter. I'm not saying that. I don't back them because typically it is the finances and balancing that. Is this version worth my money? Is it worth tying up my money for 18 months or what have you?
So what I'm hearing, because I know you've mentioned, Brent, that have backed certain campaigns, like you mentioned Everyday. I know that you're a fan of that. I think it's one of your most popular videos on your channel. I mean, you can clearly tell that you and your wife really enjoy that game. Yeah. But what I'm sort of seeing is that there's sort of three components, and Jacob is also kind of throwing in your points as well, is that you have to love the IP of this game. So it has to be like, this is the one game I'm backing this year. So I'm willing to, spend a large amount if this is an IP I really love, and this is the one game I'm backing this year. And then on top of that, it has to have those deluxe components. That's definitely something that is tantalizing. It's like, oh, well, great. I also get these kind of enhanced components. And then also in expansions, like, oh, well, there's also kind of like these expansions that build upon the game, which are also attractive. One thing for me when it comes to backing Kickstarters is it's very helpful. I find I can eliminate the majority of campaigns just by simply asking the question, can I play this with my kids? Because the reality is, if it's not a game that sets up quickly and it holds the attention of little ones, I'm probably not going to get it to the table just because I have too many small children at the stage of my life where I don't really have the opportunities to play long, lengthy campaign games, which I'd love to do. I know usually when my wife and I do sit down to play games, we're so tired that we just want to play something that's sort of lighthearted and can be set up and put down pretty quickly. I think the most crunchy thing we actually get to play is Deliverance, and that's really because it's part of the company, and it's, we know how to play it. So kind of setting it up and leaving it set up on our board game table and coming back to it hasn't been an issue. But in terms of learning new games, like we've sat down trying to like play the Skyrim game. I couldn't even get through the rule book. I spend like the evening reading the rule book, and then I'm tired, and then I forget the rules that I just read the other day. So that could be the catch-22. So that's been helpful for me just as like a deterrent to backing campaigns I really think are cool. It's like, oh, I could even jump on this. But my question is, well, if I bought this, would it just sit on my shelf? It probably would just sit on my shelf. And then if it's a game that I'd like to play with my kids, maybe in 10 years, they're a bit older. But right now, they can't really play this game, or I have to modify the rules in order to play it with them. So that for me is my main thing when it comes to backing Kickstarters. And not many Kickstarters are aimed towards children. I actually recently backed Marco Pacoda's project. He has a Cats of some Saint Michelle or something like that. But he has a little expansion add-on you can add to it, which I purchased, which is the kittens version of this cats game. So that was like, oh great, my kids would love this. So I just jumped on that straight away, and that was part of the reason. Like, I could play this with my kids. So that's. But again, that's a very small game, not many campaigns can do that. And what Marco did there is that he had it as an add-on to his campaign. So really, it wasn't about that particular product. It was about this bigger product, but he just had it as an attachment. I was like, oh, well, that's a cool attachment. I'll jump on that. So that's sort of my deterrent to backing campaigns. But I think that the problem with our line of work is that we do have so many cool campaigns, and it is so tempting to back our clients' campaigns. So there's many times where I've had to just, bite my lip and say, oh, so I really want to back this, but I can't, because if we backed all the cool campaigns that are, come across our table as an agency promoting cool tabletop games, we wouldn't be in business probably just backing all these games.
I find I also ask myself, like, say, let's take a Castles game, $300. If I had $300, I can make a pretty legit mini collection for $300.
For sure.
Or I could have one game. That's something else I balance as well, right? Because I could have done that DC United and got all those miniatures, because as soon as I start playing, I'm like, oh man, it'd be cool to play with this guy against this guy, this character against that character and whatnot. But it's like, am I actually going to play? What's my price per play at that point? If I back it and I play it 5 times, I'm at $60 a play, And with so many games being pumped out all the time, that's the thing that people need. As much as we all need money to buy these things, I think everybody just needs time to play these things more than they need money, because like you said, at the end of the night, you're like, oh man, end of the day, you're like, I want to play a game. And then you pull up this game and you have to read these, 25-page rule books, and you're like, I'm exhausted just thinking about that. Let's just play comfort food. And then you kind of go back to your same 3-5 games that you play often, that have that 30-minute setup and teardown, right? Like my whole thing in gaming is like 30 to 60 minutes, like, with exceptions, obviously. Like Everdell is an exception, but Everdell's a special case for me, because the 99% of my plays have been at most 3. Majority have been just me and my wife. So then we can play a game in 60 minutes and we can just enjoy that game. Sure. But after 60 minutes, I start getting less and less invested. Maybe it's my ADD, probably is my ADD, but 30 to 60 is what I like. I'd rather play like 6 games in a game night at half an hour each versus 1 game for 3 hours.
For sure.
So one thing I've recently got into is the Pokemon trading card game. Once again, but I'm doing it now as an adult, which is dangerous because you have adult money. I played Pokemon trading card game as a child, and when I got into like this angsty teenage stage, and I was like, I'm just gonna give away all these kids cards. So I got rid of all my Pokemon cards. So now I'm coming back to it now, like introducing it to my children. So it's a fun sort of full circle where you play this as a child. Now I'm coming back to it, and it's pure nostalgia for me, because I have no interest in buying like the most kind of like meta decks. I'm just trying to buy the Pokemon I played as a child. And what I've found is that you can save a lot of money by buying what's known as singles. So you don't buy these sort of starter decks and things. Those are helpful. But if you actually build your own custom decks, you can actually get a really decent deck. When I mean decent deck, I mean for like a nostalgia purpose, not as like a battle deck.
Right.
By actually buying the singles. So I think, again, it comes down to this idea of like secondhand, right? And this is something that we often overlook in the tabletop series. I can. It's like everything has to be new. Well, no, because there's so many people who've bought games, maybe played it once, sitting on their shelf, and now want to sell it. I think it's the same with like these Pokemon cards. Everybody wants the most powerful Pokemon so that they can play competitively. Well, I have no interest in playing competitively. I'm willing to buy the throwaway cards that people want to get rid of, because I'm playing for nostalgia reasons, and all the decks I have are for my family, and they're not particularly competitive.
Mhm.
So, with that in mind, have you ever gone into selling your games? Because that might be one way where you can actually fund your Kickstarters. Well, if I just sell these 2 games, I could then back this new project, or vice versa, or I could take a good chunk out of it. Is that any Jacob and Brent yourselves? Is that something that you've done in terms of like selling, passing on games, and kind of cycling through your collection?
Yeah, I did. I have sold a few games. I'm trying to think which ones I have sold. Yeah. Skinny of it, I have sold it. And yeah, in theory, I could use that money. But I don't have pretty much the games that I'm keeping are ones that like I play. Does that make sense? Like that sounds so obvious, right? But I'm looking actually. I log all my stuff. Okay, so as I look at my insights for this year, because sometimes it's like, hey, how long has it been on my shelf? I've already this year played 60% of the games that I own.
Great.
Okay,
Yeah.
and it might be higher than that because I think in my stats, some of my exit games are quote unquote owned, but I've done those like 2 years ago and they're gone. So, you know what I mean? Like I look at my shelves and be like, I'm gonna play every game I have this year, right? And I try to do that, and then so I look, hey, has this game not been played in the last 18 months? If it hasn't, then I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm all right getting rid of it. But at the same time, it's tough, right? Because it's like, oh man, I enjoyed that game that one time I played it 18 months ago, right? This is a perfect example. Creature Comforts by Kids Table Board Gaming.
Yeah.
I had that one. I did back that one. I got roped into that one because it has like worker placement. I absolutely love worker placement. It came with as part of the campaign, like 3 extra cards or whatever. One of them being Everdell. So I was like, hey, this is really cool. I can play, I can craft this game of Everdell in this other game. And it had all these like game trays and like wooden bits and stuff like that. And it sat on my shelf. And I looked back through all my plays and I was like, I've legitimately, last time I played it was 9 months ago. And before that, it was 3 months. And so I kind of got to the point, and I don't know if I'm answering your question in a roundabout way or not, but I got to the point where I was like, do I have this on my shelf because I truly like the game, or do I have this on my shelf because it's a collection, right? Because sometimes Kickstarters are just that. They're collections, right? Like people will potentially never play these games once, maybe never, but it's like, hey, it's a badge that I have this. It's like a badge of honor that I have this game and I have all the exclusive things. And so that's a whole nother can of worms or whatever. But yes, in short, I have sold some games, but I'm looking at my games and the ones behind me. I've pretty much sold all the ones that I want to sell. Because again, I try to like, hey, I want to play all my games every year, which is sometimes very challenging. You know what I mean? Like if I played 60% of my games and I have 100 games, I played 60 different games this year. And I'm probably around that 100 mark. And so I also have to think back in Kickstarters, hey, I'm going to back this Kickstarter. I got to find place in my house in my shelf in my house, right? So I have a 4x4 Calyx, and then I have a Calyx TV stand that's half full already, and the rest is like books and stuff. And then I'm like, hey, I'm backing this Kickstarter. Like my wife Nicole, she's like, where are you going to put it? I'm like, or I'm going to buy this game or whatever. Like if I'm going to back Kickstarter, or hey, I'm going to buy a game, where are you going to put it? Oh no, I'll figure it out when it comes, or I'll figure out when I get it. And then it's like, oh, okay, now I have it. Where am I going to put it now? You know what I mean? And so I guess if I go back, that might be another reason why I don't back Kickstarters. At the same time, that doesn't really matter because that means I wouldn't be buying any game. But yes, sometimes I do sell games. I don't know if you do, Jacob.
Yeah, I've done it with a couple. It's kind of interesting because I guess it was a solution and also a partial problem. I think some of the ones that I've sold have always been more of I've tended to sell like past Kickstarter editions, and most of the time I've done it, it's been like big Kickstarters that like Come On has done. I sold a Zombicide Black Pledge or Black Plague pledge. I sold a Project Elite pledge. I sold Massive Darkness 1 pledge. And those are huge games. And I think with those, it was nice when I got rid of it. One, because it, like you said, it cleared off a lot of shelf space. And there is kind of I guess one of the nice things, I guess, if you want to consider it a long-term investment with a lot of like Come On games, is, it may cost you, $200 to back a game. But once it's fulfilled, you could probably flip it, within the first year that it delivers, easily for what you paid for it, but probably at 1.5 times what you paid for it. So there is sort of a, I guess, positive outlook in the sense that if you have the capital to invest in the Kickstarter and buy it, and then you try it out and you decide, it's not for me, you can usually make your money back and then some to help look at something else. So I do see that as being part of a positive. But I would say on the negative side of things is that I think one of the things that hampers me with some of the Kickstarters is honestly that I think we might be getting to a point where some Kickstarters are getting too big. I think we've kind of lost kind of the joy of like, hey, I backed this game and it was great. I'll say reasonably, I think we've looked, Sean, like with some of our data, like a lot of the biggest pledges that are backed or average pledges, it's like what, $110? Is that what we look at about per pledge? That is a lot of money, but it's not awful. But I think we're seeing a massive rise, especially with some of the stuff that, Awaken Realms has done and Come On has done, that we're getting a lot more campaigns that are becoming these like $250, $300 investments. And it is cool when you look at, if I look at DC Heroes United, I've got like 150 miniatures I can play with. That's really exciting. But as you said, it's like, who's going to play with all of these? And with some of it, you look into it where it's like, I think if most people are honest, like I probably don't even care. Some of the stretch goal characters for DC United were like, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel to get some of these people here. Like, who's really jonesing to play Arm Fall Off Boy or Condiment King?
King.
I mean, they're fun memes, and you may play it once for the meme, but I don't think there's, you're not going to. I'm not walking into Old Navy and finding T-shirts with, Condiment King on the front of them. Like, no kid is dressing up as Condiment King for Halloween. And so when we look at some of those, it's kind of like, oh, I have it, but do I really care that I have it? Like, I'm actually just investing a lot of dollars for a lot of stuff that's taking up space. And maybe it's too big. Maybe we'd be better off with a smaller model, where we don't necessarily cross that line of it being, do you want to pick this? Or like you said, do you want to have Christmas this year? And so I think that's kind of one of the things that is maybe something to consider with publishers, especially with, I think, just the current economic conditions. Things cost more. And so as things start to cost more, like there does still tend to be a ceiling that people are like, I can't justify going over this point, especially if I'm looking at it like this is a game I might only get to play once, maybe twice a year. And sometimes that becomes a lot harder to justify. I know, like we've all kind of discussed, like I play a lot with my kids, but I play a lot with my wife. And when she and I play, it's usually after we get the kids to bed. And like you said, we only may have an hour to play before I want to conk out myself. And so we find that like a lot of the games in my collection that get the most plays are games that have a retail of like probably 40 or less. Honestly, I've become it's been kind of more my personal flavor, but a connoisseur of just small box games that pack a lot of game into a small package. They're easy to set up. Usually the rules aren't that long. I get an enjoyable experience out of it, and I can play it in 30 minutes to an hour, and I'll probably play that game 30 or 40 times a year. So when I'm looking at my cost per plays, it's like I'm paying less than $1 per play. That becomes really valuable to me. And so I think that's kind of one of the things, maybe, is that instead of necessarily packing a lot more extra fluff, like make the core of what you have really, really good. And you don't
Mhm.
necessarily have to have a $300 price tag on it. If you make a really great game that I can table a lot of times and have a good time with, and it's going to cost me less than, especially right now, let's just raise the ceiling a little bit and just say 75. If you can give me a great experience and it's going to cost me less than $75 and I know that I'm going to play it several times, it becomes a lot more attractive to me as a potential backer than, well, I really wanted to get this because, like DC United, I really wanted to play with the Green Lantern. It was the last Kickstarter, like the last expansion that was announced. And I was like, man, I love the Green Lantern, but at what point do I not care anymore?
Mhm.
uh,
Yep.
there's a goofy bar graph. There was a comedian that did a joke, and it talked about like, it's like about trying to meet girls, but it was like there's a bar graph of like the attractiveness of the girl to how intuitive you're willing to hear about her house cat. And it's like that goes up, and it's like at a certain point, I don't care how attractive you are, I don't want to hear about your house cat. And so I think that kind of becomes the thing with some of the games is like, I don't care how many cool things you're giving me. At a certain point, like I'm not going to spend $350 because I just don't want to have all of this extra stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think like Arcane Wonders did a good thing with Foundations of Metropolis. It's not Metropolis, is it? Foundations of, like, they did Foundations of Rome that was like blinged out and whatnot. And I wanted that game a whole bunch because it's like Emerson Matsuuchi and whatever. And then they're like, you know what? We're giving the exact same core game, but in a smaller game, right? At
Sure.
that, I don't know if it's at that 50. I'm assuming it's probably around that $50 price point, right? And for someone who lives in a vacuum that doesn't know about Foundations of Rome, it's like, oh, that's amazing, you know? But for myself, I'm like, this is amazing, but I could have 3D miniatures and I could have a neoprene mat and I could have metal coins. And if there's things that I love about board gaming bling, it's metal coins and neoprene mats. And so it was kind of like, I want that. I never got it. But now I'm thankful that Foundations of whatever their retail version of it is available. And so I can pretty much get the exact same game at legitimately like a fifth of the cost.
Yeah, for
In
sure.
terms of going back to selling, I haven't really tried my hand at selling games. I tend to give them as gifts. There's this thing in Ireland where if you want to get rid of some junk, you just call it a gift. You give it to someone because it's too rude to not accept the gift. But no, if there's games which they don't see a lot of light of day, I tend to give them away as gifts. Whether it's for like an upcoming birthday, and so I tend to try to keep my games in a good condition. And when I play them, I want to make sure everything's, because I do intend to pass them on either as gifts or to sell them. But I haven't really tried selling them. When you've sold your games, Brent and Jacob, where have you sold them? Has it been on eBay? Has it been on Board Game Geek? Has it been on Facebook Marketplace? Where do you sort of go to sell your games?
I'm sort of old school in the sense that I don't sell too much. And so most of my selling was when I was in college. And so I used eBay. So now I've just kind of gravitated towards that, given I know that's not necessarily the most effective, especially with seller fees and stuff right now. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best, but it's the one I've had fallen back to just because I felt like it was the easiest to get it out there and sell it quickly, get it off my shelf.
I think for me, I know for me, I guess it would be Marketplace, but I'm from like rural communities or whatever. And so I don't have like tons of obviously people and whatnot. And so I'm, 50 minutes from a major market of Winnipeg. So I'll just like the local communities that are around me, they'll have like a Facebook group and be like, hey, you know what? Selling games 1, 2, 3, this price, whatever.
Message me.
And so it'll be like that. And to be honest, I try to, like, if I have a few small games, like I think with Creature Comforts, I think I paid like close to $100 with the Kickstarter. And then I did that one and like just a few smaller games that I was like, well, whatever. And it was like price. And Creature Comforts was like, I don't know, maybe I said like $40. But then I was like, or you can take everything for $70. And then someone's like, okay, I'll take everything, right? Because I truly just wanted to get rid of everything, but I didn't want to nickel and dime someone and not showing up, be like $10 for this, $5 for this. So that, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to deal with that hassle. So then I just kind of just lowballed my own whatever. Like, could I have thrown the Kickstarter version up on BGG or on eBay or Marketplace in a bigger market? And, I paid $100 with shipping and everything. Could I have, sold it for 65 because all the cards were sleeved? It has all the wooden components, which if you go on their website and buy the wooden upgrades, it's like $20 alone. Could I have done that? Yeah, probably. But then at the same time, sometimes it's like, what's my time worth as well, right? What's my time and people ghosting me and not showing up, or a myriad of reasons in that regard. So I just do it kind of locally. There's a couple, like I have a couple game groups, like gaming buddies and stuff like that. At the same time, I'll say a lot of the guys that I game with, I am the source of the games. And so, like, if I don't want it, I'm not going to, like, I typically won't just like sell it off to them because they're not necessarily collecting games. Like all the majority of the guys I play games with, like, yeah, they have games, but like my core group, I think only like one in the group has a substantial collection. The rest are just come together and we sit at the table and we play and we laugh at each other. And then we play more and then laugh at each other even more. You know what I mean? Like, for them, they love games, but not like me. They come to the table to just have fun. Whereas I'm like, hey, can you get your cup maybe like 6 inches away from your player board? I'm more like that. And I need to remind myself, Brent, it's just a game. I heard a quote a long time, like, you can like love people and use things, or you can use people and love things. I think I said it right, but you know what I mean? So like, if something gets spilt on some cards, yeah, it'll probably drive me nuts, but I need to learn to be like, it's all right. Like, this relationship that I have with this person sitting across the table is worth far more than a game. Right.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I could probably get more money if I would, put it up on BGG and whatnot, but then I have to pay. Then it's like shipping and all that stuff, and I've already mentioned how expensive shipping rates are.
Yeah.
And so,
and packaging, right? Because you got to find a box now, and
exactly. And sometimes I'm fine giving a game away as well, because if I can bless someone else, why not?
Sure. Yeah.
So, Brent, you mentioned that you track your plays. What are you using to do that? Because I think that's quite helpful, because you're able to sort of look and say, okay, I actually haven't played this game in over a year. What am I doing? Maybe I should consider selling it, and then I can back that Kickstarter because I've sold it now, or whatever. So what are you using to track your plays?
I use the app BG Stats, it's called.
Okay.
Which I'm assuming stands for Board Game Stats. And so, yeah, I could just track. I'm just looking at it. I can add to my collection. I can sync it to BGG. I can. I can't. I can see. The majority of my plays, are on what day? Monday. 22% of my plays this year have been on a Monday. 7% on Tuesday. And shockingly, Saturday is at 11%. Which one would think, hey, on a weekend, you'd probably play more games. But apparently Mondays is when I play the majority of my games.
Interesting.
Mostly at home. At the two-player count. Almost 60% of my plays are at 2-player count.
Well, Brent, we better wrap things up. Is there anything you want to end with or direct people towards?
No, I'm just humbled that you reached out to me. Typically, I'm reaching out to designers and publishers and be like, hey, do you have an hour that you could spare and be willing to chat with me about board game design and things like that? But so I'm thankful that and humbled and blessed that you reached out to me. And if people obviously want to find me, some of my content or whatnot, Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples on YouTube. And so, yeah. I will say, as much as we talk about Kickstarter and things like that stuff, and I've said this a few times, but I want to just make it like really clear. I'm not against Kickstarter, and I'm working on a project right now with a designer, and we're trying to pitch it, and it might end up on Kickstarter. Ironically, it might end up on Kickstarter, and then I would obviously appreciate the support of other people, right? And so I just want to make sure that that's known, that I'm not, saying I'm boycotting that, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, I'm using it. That's not the case at all. So
Yeah, well, when you're creating your Kickstarter, you'll be able to listen back to this and like, oh yeah, I need to make sure my campaign doesn't do these things or is addressing these concerns. So this is what is helpful about this discussion.
And I wouldn't be running it if the game would actually get signed somewhere. A publisher would be doing that, and the publisher would be potentially making all those stretch goals and the deluxeified version and things like that. And so that may never happen. Who knows? But in case it does, I just need to have a big caveat that, like, I do agree. And this will be I'll leave it this. I think the beginning, and maybe I should have started this. The start of backing Kickstarters, sometimes it's like, it used to be small businesses that they would never get their foot in the door without that, right? And sometimes we back a Kickstarter because we like that company, or we like that designer and we want to support that designer. And maybe that's a conversation for another day of why we do back Kickstarters, right? Which I'm sure you probably already talked about that. But like, sometimes it's like, hey, you know what? Like, why did I back Trekking 2nd edition? Well, I really love Trek in the World, and I've interviewed Charlie, and so I have that connection with Charlie, the designer, and so I want to support him in that regard. And sometimes finances allow me to do that, and majority of the times it doesn't.
Well, Brent, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Wish you the very best in your YouTube journey, and yeah, we might touch base again shortly. So, Robot Richard, we'll have you sign us out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.